Debate, the Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is an honour to once again rise in this House and enter into debate. It is good to be back in Parliament, regardless of the time of year. Even though summer is not normally a time that Parliament sits, we have important business to do, so it's good to be back. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to hope in my 10-minute speech cover a whole range of subjects, but I want to bring up something that constituents talk to me on a regular basis about, and that's trust and the deterioration of trust that has taken place between Canadians and their government. Now, on October 21st, Canadians sent a minority Liberal government to Ottawa. Strong Conservative opposition and two other parties as well. And throughout the last number of months, we've seen not the attitude of a Liberal government that clearly got their hands slapped by Canadians for a series of ethical failings, among other things, but rather a government that seems to be clear on maintaining the aura of not even just a majority rule, but it seems that this current Prime Minister feels that he has the divine right to rule this country in whatever regard he feels the whim of the day. And Mr. Speaker, that has caused a deterioration of trust. And when I hear from constituents time and time again, each and every day, whether it be email or phone or even being stopped in a grocery store, there has been a deterioration of trust between the institutions of government and Canadians. And that trust is a sacred thing, builds the very foundation of what our democratic process is all about. Now, we've seen a number of ethical violations. In fact, this current Prime Minister is the only Prime Minister to have ever been found guilty of ethics violations, not only once, not only twice, but now it would seem that he's well on his way to a third. Yet we have investigations stymied. We have documents that are not being released. Cabinet confidence is not being waived. And although I note that the parliamentary secretary to the House Leader made an impassioned defense about why the Prime Minister didn't mislead the House earlier when it came to saying that they took unprecedented action to release everything. Well, the facts simply speak for themselves. There is so much more to the story than what we are learning. And with the current scandal, we find ourselves in the midst of the we scandal. We find, once again, that a Prime Minister doesn't know the line, seems to wander back and forth between politics and government, and even seeing his family and friends benefit from the power that was entrusted to the government to govern the country. That is causing an erosion of that sacred trust that exists between the institutions of government, including this House, and Canadians. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is increasingly clear, and certainly I hear about it on a daily basis, that that trust has been lost. And as we continue to find out more, in fact, in question period yesterday, I asked the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Youth a question about if she knew about the Prime Minister's conflict of interest. And it wasn't an hour after question period that an article came out where it was revealed that she had met with only a few days prior to this announcement. That deterioration of trust is causing a significant impact. I have the honor of sitting on the Ethics Committee where we saw something that was truly unprecedented. A quite simple motion to simply say, let's shine the light on this scandal. Let's get the information we need. Yet we saw government members of that committee filibuster and try to shut down proceedings. Well, Canadians expect better from their government. And what I find very, very interesting, and I wrote down a number of quotes and have checked in the minutes of the meeting afterwards, but a lot of the things that the government members said, it shows a stunning level of hypocrisy. Now, Mr. Speaker, I would mention that I will be splitting my time with one of my honourable colleagues from Quebec, and I won't try to pronounce his riding's name, only out of respect for the French language. So I appreciate the reminder to say that. But we have a government being rocked by another ethics scandal. Now, to the bill that we're debating today. Now, I've heard a number of members opposite say, oh, well, it's all the Conservatives' fault. In fact, it's probably Stephen Harper's fault. That seems to be the thing that they say most regularly, and I see the parliamentary secretary to the House Leader probably preparing a question right now. But when we were faced with a pandemic that changed the way that all of us, all Canadians, in fact, pretty much everybody around the world, operated their daily lives, instead of rising to the challenge in terms of where we're at as a parliament, we saw a shutting down of parliament. Now, the members opposite will say very, very clearly, oh, well, you actually ask more questions now than you ever have. And it's probably Stephen Harper's fault again. But the reality is, in fact, what is very, very clear is that this government emphasizes style over substance. Yes. There's lots of questions. Yes, we admit that. And we were happy to work within the context of ensuring that there was democratic accountability. But we saw a shutdown of all other aspects of Parliament, including committees. In fact, it was only a few days ago that we saw the opening up of a few other committees. And the Ethics Committee only met for the first time this past Friday, after a number of months' breaks. And I'll tell you, when I tell my constituents that I'm on the Ethics Committee, my constituents, their first comment is, wow, that either must be really busy, or does the Prime Minister actually allow you to do anything? Well, it's unfortunate that and I will refer, that we attempted to open up, to allow the Ethics Commissioner to come to the Ethics Committee here shortly after the committee was struck in this new Parliament, and the Liberal members voted against having the Ethics Commissioner come and speak to committee, to have an honest dialogue about what was found to be a violation, second violation, of the Prime Minister in terms of ethics rules. So, Mr. Speaker, there are so many aspects of the ethical failings of this government. The Cottage Chronicles, as my constituents have continually referred to them as, where the Prime Minister would make an announcement, and we saw quite often an announcement with few details, clarification on those details later in the day, and then a whole host of questions that would remain on any of the programs that have been announced, and in some cases, months and months delays as to actually seeing those programs implemented. Now, regarding the bill at hand, specifically with the disability, thank you, specifically regarding the disability portion of this, Conservative support making sure that those in our country that need support get it. Now, the members opposite have said, well, it's all the Conservatives' fault for seeing these delays. Well, let the record state very clearly. The Conservatives made it clear that we were happy to deal with the legislation and that Parliament should be the body to do so. Yet the Liberals played politics with that and shut it down. Now, regarding the other two, there's three main aspects to this bill. We have the wage subsidy that there are a lot of businesses that are applying. Some are benefiting. But specifically, when I speak to small and medium-sized businesses, they speak about how complicated some of these applications are. And when I read through the portions of this bill that deal with the wage subsidy, we see further complications. Now, for a large firm with a corporate office in a large city, that's okay because they've got an accounting department and a legal department. Well, the accounting department and legal departments of the small businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises, especially in a rural constituency as is mine, it's often one person, or it's a part-time role, or they hire an accountant or simply do the books themselves. So the unnecessarily complicated nature of aspects of this bill make it more difficult for people to be able to access. And a brief comment on the justice elements of the bill. Certainly, the times that we find ourselves in, I think it's necessary to have a look at these. But I would note that deterioration of trust, which I mentioned at the beginning of my speech, when reading aspects of what the justice portion of this bill, the thought in the back of my mind was, are they trying to sneak something into this that would have that negative impact on Canadians? So, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to being able to answer questions on this and trying to dive into many aspects of what is an important debate that we're having here today. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? Commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm afraid you wouldn't provide me the amount of time that would be required for me to be able to address the member's statement when he talks about substance versus style, especially if you wanted to compare this government to the previous government. The substance has been plenty on this side since we've been in government, and I sat in opposition benches when it was all style. They called it the Harper bubble, Mr. Speaker. Having said that, the member makes reference to the legislation, and in trying to give the impression that when it comes to the issue of disabilities, that maybe we could have done it previously or earlier. And the member needs to be a little bit more forthright with members and those that are following the debate that the Conservative Party did have the opportunity to support the passage, as other political parties inside this chamber did, and we could have had support for people with disabilities weeks ago had it not been for the Conservative tactics in the House.
The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And he's right in as far as it could have been passed, but because the Liberals have shut down Parliament and refused to allow Parliament to do its job, it wasn't. So when it comes to playing politics, it is a shame, really, that the government would play politics with an institution like this. That they would use the very House of Commons, which is the pinnacle of Canadian democracy, as a bargaining chip in political discourse in this country. The only body where we can be assured, not a small group of reporters, where the state broadcaster gets a disproportionate of the number of the questions, but truly where members are represented from every corner of this great country. So for the member to suggest that somehow Conservatives tried to shut down that or wouldn't allow it, it is shameful that they are not allowing Parliament to do its function in terms of its constitutional function, but also in terms of the ability for Parliament to do the job that Canadians expect it to, the essential service of ensuring that my constituents, like the constituents of every member within every corner of this country, are doing the job that Canadians sent them here to do. So it's unfortunate that that continues to be the attitude represented from the other side.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to congratulate my colleague for having raised a fundamental democratic issue, trust. Often, I speak with my colleague for Lac-Saint-Jean, and we constantly remind ourselves of who we are working for, our constituents. So my colleague talked about the trust our constituents have in us, and I liked what he said because he showed that some Canadians are cynical. Since the Ethics Committee is extremely busy these days, many ethical questions have been raised. We've talked about the Prime Minister's ethics violations. Now, if we want to keep the trust of our constituents, if we don't want to lose that trust, we cannot individually, as MPs, profit from our positions. Coming back to the wage subsidy, would my colleague agree that some political parties are benefiting from the wage subsidy, and this is making Canadians more cynical?
Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate my Bloc colleague's question. Now, when it comes to the decisions made within the party that he's referring to, that was a party decision of which MPs did not have involvement in. So I will leave it to the party to answer those questions. But he does talk about trust. And during the Ethics Committee last week, The honourable member who spoke before me from, I believe it was Hall Elmer, made the comment that democracy is fragile. This comment was made in the Ethics Committee last week. And although I see one of the other committee members sitting across the way, I fail to remember her constituency name, made the comment, a number of comments around the stereotype of politicians. And it's right. She's right. There is this negative stereotype around politicians. And when we see a prime minister's family benefiting $300,000 from an organization with close ties to the Liberal government, a $900 million sole source contract that would have resulted in $42 million in fees, and a whole host of questions surrounding that, the stereotype, unfortunately, of politicians and the pork is true, and it causes a deterioration of that trust, that fundamental and sacred trust that exists between Parliament, its members, and Canadians. And it's a trust that's difficult to earn, but unfortunately is being eroded.